Hi and welcome back to my channel. Let's talk about how we can improve our logging system using Serilog. Right now I'm using the default logging which comes with Microsoft ASP.NET Core projects developed by Microsoft. It's simple, it works, but for many use cases you need more sophisticated tools. Today we want to talk about how Serilog can solve and add more options to our logging system. First, let's install Serilog for ASP.NET Core and use that as builder host. And with that, we started using Serilog instead of default logging system. But right now, we don't see any logs here. That's because we need syncs. Serilog has the logs, but doesn't know where to send them. To solve that, let's install Serilog syncs for console. I added some config for my Serilog. The most important part is write to console. You can ignore these two lines for now and we would come back to them. But right now, if you run your project, this time you see a lot of logs colored and more detailed, more than what you get with Microsoft. Let's manage some logs and add minimum level. We want just to see information data, and this time it's much less data because we only see information level logging. We can change it to trace or verbose in Serilog terms, and this time you see a lot more data. Anything that happens in your ASP.NET Core project is showing off in console. There are two main ways to log data using Serilog. One is calling this a static class and use different levels. The other one is injecting ILogger into your project. You have probably used this before because it's the default implementation of Microsoft, and Serilog just sits on top of this interface and implements its own logging system. Let's get rid of these logs. We don't need to call a static class and remove this using. See, it's already too much work for one class, and just don't use it. Stick with interfaces. And let's go back to program.cs. Here I want to see critical or error level and up. Let's change it to error and run the application again. We won't see any logs here other than error level and fatal level. We can use app settings to set up our Serilog, and this is the way to do that. Just add a section for Serilog, add your default configurations here. I'm just setting minimum level, but there are tons of configuration options that you can set in Serilog. Almost everything can be set in app settings. There's also another logging section. This section is used only with Microsoft extensions for logging, what we had before. We have replaced that default with Serilog, so we no longer need this section. You also need to add this line of code to your logging system that informs Serilog to read its settings from configuration file. The default level now is information, and this is what we get here. For any other namespace in my project, it starts with warning and warning. Microsoft has its own logs. Let's add them to our project. Run the project again. This time, other than my own logs, I see lots of logs that come from different sources. For the most part, I set them to warning. I need to know how my own application works. Sometimes when you're debugging a problem, you need to have them, but for the most part, you just want to see your own logs. Sometimes we need to preserve logs to compare two different situations together, or maybe to fit them into an AI model and debug application using another tool. But right now, as soon as we close the console, all logs are lost. To fix that, let's add a package called syncs file that writes all your logs into a file. To use log to file, you need to add this setting to logger configuration. This is the folder and this is the file for my logs, and I want this file to renewed every day. You can use different intervals here for like minutes, months, year. Let's run the application again and just watch what happens to your folder system. There is a new folder and a file which I can't open while the application is running because it's being written to. But let's close the application and double click here. As you can see, all the logs that were in your console now available in your file. In my application, user can go to expenses and edit an expense, and you want to log the data here. Anything that user sees, you want to be serialized and be shown here. It would also be written to our config file. Now I use ILogger to inject logging to edit page, and I want to see what object is being edited with the ID and the information inside that object. I am using a string format from C# to do this, and pay attention to this tiny @ here. This @ asks Serilog to serialize this object and convert it to a JSON object. So it would be a text inside your logs, and you can see what is actually inside the object without any coding, any extra coding. Just add this @ and it simply works. Running the application, this line of log appears in console. This is my expense object with all its information converted to a JSON text, and I can see the same data in text file. Let's reopen this text file for log, and this is the expense itself and all the information inside that object, which has a collection inside it. Sometimes debugging just gets too complicated and we need a lot more information about each log. It's not enough to have the time, the level, and the message. We also might need something like a thread ID. We want to know in a multi-thread application which thread called which log, so later we could compare them and track down what bug caused this situation. To do that, we need to use enrichments. One enrichment that is used in many cases is ThreadId enrichment. Just add that enrichment to your logs and run the application again, and this time all logs are coming with a ThreadId which is not visible right now because you need to change the template for logs. Let's update our console and change it to write to console with this template and run the application again. We see the log, the level, and the thread just as we have implemented here. Now let's write logs to database. I want to use PostgreSQL, and let's install a package sync for that. I've configured my PostgreSQL database to this connection string, and I want tables to be generated automatically, and the table name would be logs. As you can see in my pgadmin, I can see the database I set up, and this is the table for me. Let's see all rows, and right now this is the only row I get, and we can see most of the data in logs, level, message, template. There are too much data, and luckily Postgre is very good with handling JSON data, so you can see detailed information about your log, and there is a thread ID, action ID, all information that might help you debug your application. In this video, we talked about Serilog and how to use different features of this logging system. Thanks for watching, and see you soon.